I'm going to show you game 10 of the World Chess Championship final between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, against his challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, just a quick reminder of where we're at going into this game. So Magnus Carlsen has just won the previous two games, giving himself a 3-point lead with just 5 games to go. Now, that is a really tough situation for the challenger. So how would Nepo approach this game? You know, it reminds me very much of a game of football where one team is 3-0 down with 10 minutes to go and they're being outplayed. Well, you know, what does the manager do? Does he throw on attackers but risk losing by a humiliating margin? Or does he hold tight and try to save face? It's a tricky one. Nepo today playing with the black pieces. Well, let's see how he actually approached this game. So Carlsen playing white went for e4. e5 from Nepo, well, that's the first indication that Nepo might just be holding things tight, because if he wanted maybe a sharper struggle, then he might have played the Sicilian. Not that I think Carlsen would have indulged in anything too sharp. But let's see anyway. Knight f3, knight f6. So Nepo sticks with the Petrov, this really solid opening that he's employed in previous games. Knight takes pawn, d6. And now instead of the normal knight f3, Carlsen goes for knight d3. Slightly left field, but he has played this before, and the intention is clear that he wants to go for a quick endgame. Queen e2, pinning the knight. Black has to defend the knight with the queen, and that stops any pin nonsense. Knight f4. Now we can see this knight controls the d5 square. And here, well, Carlsen has employed this variation before. Game Carlsen-Caruana in their World Championship match in London 2018 went knight c6 here, and that went into an endgame fairly quickly. Nepo did it another way. He played knight f6, which covers this square, preventing white's knight coming in. And also, well, you can see we're about to head for an endgame. Carlsen played d4. Knight c6 from Nepo. Now, Carlsen could still keep the pieces on with bishop e3, but no, he played c3 after, well, almost 20 minutes thought. Super solid. d5 from Nepo, claiming space in the middle. Knight d2, well, we're going to see a queen exchange any moment. Knight d8. So that just reroutes the knight to a better square, and it means you can play c6 to support that pawn in the middle. Knight f3 from Carlsen, and a queen exchange. So it's quite clear what Nepo's strategy or his mindset was going into this game. He just wanted to hold tight. You know, he's just lost 2 games in a row. He doesn't want to upset things. He wants to make sure that he can make a draw and then reset. So was that going to happen? Remember, Magnus Carlsen is famous for getting a slight advantage and then just exploiting that, turning the screw. So, well, you know, white could be slightly better here with, you know, this knight is in a decent position. But black is the first to bring the rook to the open file, and, well, it doesn't look like there are really any difficulties for black here at all, or white. Carlsen challenges with rook e1. Of course, with the match situation as it is, Carlsen is very happy to make a draw. Of course, if he can squeeze and get something from this position, he'd be happy. So let's see what would happen. g3, so that allows the knight to come to this square and perhaps prepares to exchange bishops here. You could say that Carlsen is slightly better in this position, because even though the pawn structure is symmetrical, white is slightly freer here. If you can play bishop f4 and exchange off that so-called good bishop here, then black could have a few problems on the dark squares. That's a sort of very typical positional advantage. But it is so slight. And f3 covers those squares. Good move. And prepares to bring the king out to f2. But the players were playing fairly quickly, and somehow it seemed pretty gentle. c6 played. And, well, as I said, I think Carlsen is slightly better. His king is in a nice situation. It's come to the middle. Those pawns control these squares here. Excuse me, let's just remove that. He pushed with g4 here. He could have played bishop h6. And he just kept that push g4 in reserve. Now, I don't think black is in any real trouble here. But the game could go on. We know that Carlsen is brilliant at squeezing in these positions. I mean, Nepo would have to decide, do you sort of make a slight compromise, play f5 and king f7, or do you play bishop here, for example, push that knight to maybe a worse square and then come back with the bishop? That's another option. But Carlsen, well, he obviously wasn't in any mood to squeeze today, and he pushed with g4 and played the positionally desirable move, bishop f4, getting rid of those dark square bishops. But here Nepo countered excellently. I think if white is allowed a few moves in this position, so for example, if you can get in h4 and, perhaps gain some space on the queen side, potentially push on the king side, this could be interesting for white. But Nepo's next move is excellent, g5. So that prevents any expansion from white on the king side. And if knight takes bishop, well, knight takes knight, that knight can come to a good square. I mean, there's nothing particularly gained for white there. So knight e2 from Carlsen and f5. So that's an important move. So before white has a chance to play, say, rook h1 and h4, black expands on the king side. Carlsen just holds things steady. And Nepo does the same. Rook h1 and the king comes out. So you can see black has sort of gained a little bit of territory with that pawn on f5 and brings up the king. But Carlsen counters that very well with f4. And this does not lose a pawn. This is what happened. An exchange of pawns because Carlsen had put his rook on h1 very professionally, liquidating the pawns on the king side. So pawns are level. They're exchanging lots of pieces. Bishop f5. Exchange of bishops. And rook h7 check. The knight comes back. Pawn takes pawn. This doesn't win a pawn, actually, because king g6 recovers the pawn. And some checks. And the king comes back to e7. I mean, basically the players are going through the motions now. You can see that with just pawns on one side of the board, completely symmetrical, they're heading for a draw. Just a few little tactics to negotiate here. Knight g6, that covers this square. Carlsen would like to play rook f7 and invade on the 7th rank. So Nepo just has to be precise for a move or two. Let me just show you a checkmate. Knight e6, rook f7. Now black just has to be careful for one move. Be careful. Knight e7 hits the rook if the rook moves. Knight f5 mate. Ladies and gentlemen, this did not happen. Even here, black can actually save himself with knight g5, which attacks the rook, and after knight takes rook, that's still a draw, but okay. Knight e6 wasn't played. Nepo played more precisely. Rook e6, knight e5, knight e8, rook f7. It's not happening, folks, because after rook f6, that just exchanges rooks. And that was the 41st move. And after 40 moves, the players are allowed to offer a draw. The players agreed a draw here. Well, as Magnus Carlsen said after the game, he felt that Nepo was in damage limitation mode, and that's what it looked like to my eyes as well. Nepo, after those 2 defeats, just wanted to play very, very solidly with black, just to retrench, and he will reset, and he has the white pieces in the next game. So let's just have a very quick look at where we're at. That was the scoreline going into that game, and after the game, a draw, 6.5, 3.5 to Carlsen. So he just moves a bit closer to the finishing tape. He is 3 points ahead with 4 games to go. But in the next game, Nepo at least has the white pieces, and I have absolutely no doubt that Nepo will be going for it. That could be his last chance to try and claw something back. If only for his own pride, I'm sure he'll go for it in the next game. So match schedule, there is a free day on Thursday, and then they will play game 11 on Friday the 10th of December. Don't forget the commentary on chess24.com. That's the Oslo studio, very entertaining and excellent commentary, headed by David Howe, English Grandmaster, and there's Jovanka Huska as well, and hosted by Kaya, and there is the Deep Dive with Judith Polgar and Anish Giri. So there we go. We're getting closer to the end of the match. Free day tomorrow. They resume on Friday. Thanks for watching. See you then.